I'd always admired my brother, David. He was the golden boy in the family, charming, successful, and always knew the right thing to say. Growing up, I often felt like his shadow, never quite good enough to match his charisma. But I never resented him for it. At least, I didn't until the night my entire world fell apart. It started with something small, as these things often do. A pair of shoes, to be exact. I came home early from work that Friday, feeling a rare sense of excitement. I had a surprise for my wife, Emma, a weekend getaway. I thought it would be good for us, for our marriage. Things had been strained lately, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. As I stepped into the house, I noticed a pair of men's shoes by the door. Not mine. Not a stranger's either. David's. My stomach churned as a strange thought flickered through my mind, but I brushed it off. David often visited to see the kids or Emma. Maybe he dropped by unexpectedly. Emma? I called, my voice echoing in the quiet hallway. No answer. I walked into the living room, expecting to see her reading a book or scrolling through her phone. But the room was empty, eerily tidy, as if no one had been there at all. The kids' toys were neatly stacked in a corner, and the blanket Emma usually used to curl up on the couch was folded on the armrest. That's when I heard it, a soft giggle coming from upstairs, followed by hushed whispers. My heart skipped a beat. I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe David was playing with the kids in their room. But as I climbed the stairs, the sounds grew clearer. It wasn't the laughter of children. It was Emma's voice, low and intimate, mingling with David's unmistakable baritone. I froze outside the door to our bedroom, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every rational thought fled as dread curled in my gut. Slowly, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. What I saw will forever be seared into my memory. Emma was sitting on the edge of our bed, her hand resting on David's thigh. They weren't doing anything overtly scandalous, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. It was in the way they looked at each other, the way their bodies leaned toward one another, as if drawn by some invisible force. Emma gasped when she saw me, her face draining of color. "Jack," she stammered, pulling her hand away as if burned. David stood up quickly, his usual confidence replaced by an awkward guilt that made my stomach churn. "Jack, this isn't what it looks like," he began, but his voice wavered. "Then tell me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And then Emma broke it. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I looked at her, then at David, and the full weight of what I was seeing began to sink in. The trust I'd built with the two people I loved most in the world shattered like glass, the jagged edges cutting deep. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why is he here? Why are you—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt like poison on my tongue. Emma looked at David, as if searching for permission, and that was the moment I knew. There was no coming back from this. "Jack," David said, stepping forward, his hands raised as if to placate me. "We didn't mean for it to happen like this. We were going to tell you." "Tell me what?" I snapped, my voice cracking with anger and disbelief. "That my wife and my brother have been sneaking around behind my back." "It's not just sneaking around," Emma said, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to care. We're in love, Jack." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back, my breath hitching as the room spun. "In love? How could they say that to me? How could they sit there, in my house, in my bedroom, and tell me that?" "You're in love," I repeated, my voice hollow. "And what about me? What about the kids? Did you even think about them?" Emma flinched, but it was David who answered. "That's why we didn't want to say anything yet," he said. We were trying to figure out the best way to handle this. The best way? I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. And what's your idea of the best way? Destroying my family? Stealing my wife? David looked away, guilt etched into his features, but Emma met my gaze. We weren't going to steal anything, she said softly. We thought maybe it would be better if we all had a fresh start. Fresh start? I repeated, my voice rising. And where does that leave me? Alone? With nothing? The room fell silent again, and for the first time, I noticed the packed bags sitting by the closet. My stomach dropped. You were leaving, I said, my voice trembling. You were going to take the kids and leave. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. We thought it would be less painful for everyone if you just disappeared, I finished for her, my anger boiling over. Less painful for you, maybe. Did you even stop to think what this would do to me? To our children? Neither of them answered, and the truth hung heavy in the air. They hadn't thought about me or the kids. They'd only thought about themselves. I clenched my fists, struggling to contain the rage and betrayal that threatened to consume me. This wasn't just a betrayal of my marriage, it was a betrayal of my entire life. The woman I loved and the brother I trusted had conspired to tear it all apart, and now they sat there, expecting me to accept it. But I wasn't going to let them off that easily. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. My breathing was ragged, the weight of their betrayal pressing on my chest like a boulder. But just as I was about to explode, I caught sight of something on the dresser that stopped me cold. It was a stack of envelopes, the top one labeled with my name in Emma's handwriting. My pulse quickened as I snatched it up, ignoring their protests. Don't, Emma said, stepping toward me, her voice cracking. Please, Jack, just let me explain first. Explain? I shot back, my voice sharp as broken glass. I think this, I held up the envelope, might explain plenty. I tore it open with trembling fingers, unfolding the letter inside. The first words hit me like a hammer. Jack, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. My vision blurred, and I had to force myself to keep reading. I never meant for this to happen, but David and we found something we didn't know we were missing. This isn't your fault, and it's not about the kids. It's about me. About us, The rest of the letter dissolved into a haze of meaningless words, platitudes about how she hoped I'd understand someday, promises that she'd make sure the kids stayed in my life, and apologies that felt more like daggers than salve. This was your plan? I asked, my voice low and venomous. To leave a letter and vanish like a coward? Emma's lips trembled, but it was David who stepped forward. Jack, it wasn't supposed to be like this. We just wanted a chance to be happy. Happy? I barked out a bitter laugh. And what about my happiness? What about the kids' happiness? David's silence was answer enough. My hand crumpled the letter as I turned to Emma, who looked as though she might collapse under the weight of her guilt. But before I could unleash another torrent of anger, a sound cut through the tension like a knife, the sound of a car door slamming shut. My heart jumped. The kids. They were supposed to be at a friend's house for a sleepover. But as I glanced out the window, I saw our neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, walking toward the door with my 2 children in tow. Emma's face turned ghostly pale. David stiffened, his eyes darting toward the packed bags. Panic rippled through the room like a shockwave. They can't see this, Emma whispered, her voice frantic. Jack, please, we can talk about this later, but not in front of them. I wanted to scream, to rage, to throw David out of my house right then and there. But the sight of my children, innocent, oblivious to the storm brewing in their home, brought me to my senses. I took a deep breath and shoved the crumpled letter into my pocket. We're not done, I hissed at them. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, while David avoided my gaze. The doorbell rang, and I forced a smile as I opened it. "Hi, Mr. Carter," Mrs. Caldwell said with her usual warmth. "The kids were wonderful, as always. Just thought I'd bring them home myself since I was passing by." "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I bent down and scooped up my youngest, Lily, who wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. My son, Noah, looked up at me with curious eyes. "Daddy, why are you home early?" he asked. "Just wanted to see my favorite people," I said, ruffling his hair. As soon as Mrs. Caldwell left, I turned back to Emma and David. Their expressions were a mix of guilt and dread. I knew what they were thinking. I wouldn't explode in front of the kids. And they were right. For now. The evening passed in a haze. Emma busied herself with dinner, her hands trembling as she chopped vegetables. David stayed in the background, lingering like a shadow. The kids chattered about their day, oblivious to the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. But as soon as the children were in bed, I cornered them in the living room. "You have until morning to explain everything," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "And then you're out. Both of you." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but David placed a hand on her arm. "Jack, just let us tell you the truth," he said. "All of it." "The truth?" I sneered. "Is there anything left to tell?" David hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's not just about us. There's more." I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. "More?" Emma looked away, unable to meet my gaze. David took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto mine. "You deserve to know, Jack," he said. "You deserve to know everything." David's words hung in the air, an ominous weight that pressed down on me. "You deserve to know everything," he'd said, as if the destruction they'd already wrought wasn't enough. I stood rigid, arms crossed, bracing for the blow I knew was coming. "Go on," I said, my voice flat, stripped of all emotion. David glanced at Emma, who was pale and trembling, but she nodded, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Tell him," she whispered. David exhaled heavily, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his confession. "Jack, there's no easy way to say this," he began. "But, the kids aren't yours." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The words were so absurd, so gut-wrenching, that they didn't register. But then Emma's soft sobs confirmed what I'd just heard. "What?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What did you just say?" "Lily and Noah," David said, his voice cracking. "They're mine." The room spun around me. My legs felt like they might give out, and I clutched the back of the chair for support. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No. That's impossible." Emma sobbed harder, her face buried in her hands. "Jack, I'm so sorry," she choked out. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We didn't plan for it, but it's true." My mind raced, flipping through memories like a deck of cards. The day Lily was born, the way Emma clung to me in the delivery room. The way Noah's first word was, "Dad." Every birthday, every bedtime story, every scraped knee I'd kissed better, all of it felt like it was slipping through my fingers, crumbling into dust. "How long?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long has this been going on?" David hesitated, but Emma's voice broke through, trembling and raw. "Since the wedding," she admitted. I staggered back as if she'd struck me. "Since the wedding?" I echoed, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You mean to tell me that you've been lying to me for our entire marriage?" "That you and my brother have been," I couldn't even finish the sentence. "Jack, it wasn't like that," Emma said, standing now, her hands outstretched as if to calm me. "At first, it was a mistake. A horrible mistake. But then things got complicated. And when I found out I was pregnant, her voice broke, and she sank back onto the couch. I turned to David, fury boiling over. "You knew," I said, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You knew those kids were yours, and you let me believe they were mine. You let me raise them, love them, while you—" My voice cracked, and I had to turn away, clenching my fists to keep from losing control completely. David stepped forward, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Jack, I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. But we thought it was best if you believed they were yours. For the kids. For you. For me." I spat, whirling around to face him. "You thought lying to me, stealing my entire life, was for my benefit?" "We didn't want to destroy everything," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "We thought we could keep things the way they were." But then, she trailed off, tears streaming down her face. "But then what?" I demanded. "But then we couldn't keep pretending," David said, his voice low. "Emma and I, we want to be together. We want to be a family." The words were a dagger to my heart. "A family?" I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief and venom. "You already have a family, David. I built it. I gave everything to it. And now you want to take it away from me?" David's silence was answer enough. I paced the room, my thoughts a chaotic storm. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to throw them both out, to rip this betrayal out of my life like a cancer. But then my thoughts turned to the kids. Lily and Noah. My children. Or were they? Do they know? I asked, my voice sharp. Emma shook her head quickly. "No," she said. "They don't know anything. They think you're their father, Jack. And in every way that matters, you are." "Don't," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Don't try to soften this. You stole years of my life. You let me believe a lie, and now you expect me to just hand them over to you?" "We're not trying to take them away from you," David said. We want to be honest now. To figure out a way forward." "A way forward?" I laughed bitterly. "The only way forward is for you both to get out of my house. Tonight." Emma's face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. "Jack, please," she begged. "We can work something out. For the kids. For their sake." "For their sake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Don't you dare talk to me about their sake. The only thing you've ever cared about is yourselves." I stormed out of the room, leaving them behind as I headed for the stairs. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but one thought rose above the rest: nothing would ever be the same again. The house was silent, but my mind was a cacophony of voices, each screaming a different question. I sat in the dark of my bedroom, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My hands trembled as I clutched the picture frame on the nightstand, a photo of me, Emma, and the kids at the beach last summer. The smiles in that photo felt like a cruel joke now. A knock at the door jolted me out of my thoughts. "Jack, can we talk?" It was Emma's voice, quiet and tentative. "No," I said flatly, not moving from my spot. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her excuses. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I just need 5 minutes. After that, if you want me to leave, I will." I stared at the door, debating whether I even wanted to hear her out. Finally, I stood and opened it, my expression hard. 5 minutes, I said. Emma stepped inside, her face streaked with tears. She looked like a woman who had aged 10 years in the last hour. She wrung her hands as if searching for the right words, but nothing she said could possibly make this right. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling, "I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I need you to understand something." I crossed my arms, waiting. "I didn't marry you to deceive you," she said. "When we got married, I loved you. I truly did. But then, things changed. David and it just happened. I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. You never wanted to hurt me? Emma, you've destroyed me. You've destroyed everything. She flinched but pressed on. I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But Jack, the kids, they love you. You're the only father they've ever known. And I don't want to take that away from them. Or from you. Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Do you even hear yourself? I asked, my voice rising. You're asking me to stay in their lives while you and David, what? Play house? Pretend like none of this ever happened? No, she said quickly. I'm not asking that. I want us to find a way to co-parent. For their sake. I shook my head, the absurdity of her request almost laughable. You're unbelievable, I said. You want me to be some kind of stand-in father while you and David live happily ever after? Jack, I don't know what else to say, she said, her voice breaking again. I'm trying to make this right. I know I can't undo what's been done, but the kids need you. They love you. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady. Your 5 minutes are up. She hesitated for a moment, as if she might say more, but then she nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. I sank onto the bed, staring at the photo in my hands. How could I stay in their lives? How could I look at Lily and Noah every day, knowing the truth? The thought of leaving them was unbearable, but so was the thought of staying and watching Emma and David together. The sound of my phone buzzing broke the silence. I picked it up, seeing a text from David. Of all the things I expected, this wasn't it. Asterisk, we need to talk. There's more you don't know, asterisk. I stared at the screen, my anger flaring anew. What more could there possibly be? Against my better judgment, I typed back. Asterisk, come over. Now, asterisk. It wasn't long before I heard the doorbell. I opened the door to find David standing there, looking almost as wrecked as Emma had. He stepped inside without a word, his hands shoved into his pockets. What now? I demanded, crossing my arms. What else could you possibly have to say? David hesitated, his jaw tightening. Jack, this isn't just about Emma and me. There's something you need to know about the kids. My stomach dropped. You already told me they're yours, I snapped. What else is there? It's not just that, he said. Emma, she wasn't sure at first. About Noah. His words hit me like a slap. What are you saying? I mean, David said, his voice heavy, there's a chance Noah, he might actually be yours. I stared at him, my mind reeling. A chance? I repeated. You don't even know for sure? David shook his head. Emma didn't want to do a test. She thought it would complicate things. But I think you deserve to know the truth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling, the lies and half-truths piling up until I couldn't see straight. Get out, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Get out of my house. Both of you. I'll figure out the rest on my own. David didn't argue. He nodded, his shoulders slumped, and walked out without another word. As the door closed behind him, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The anger, the betrayal, the uncertainty, it was all too much. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning light streamed through the blinds, slicing the darkness that had settled over the house. I hadn't slept. How could I? My mind had been a battlefield all night, torn between rage, sorrow, and the faintest thread of hope that, somehow, there was a path forward through this mess. But as the sun rose, that hope felt more like a cruel mirage. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm. Emma and David were gone. They'd left before dawn, taking only the bare necessities. The silence should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It was heavy, oppressive, like the weight of the decisions I now had to face. The kids were still asleep upstairs. They had no idea what had happened, no idea that their world was teetering on the brink of collapse. How could I tell them? How could I look into their innocent eyes and shatter their sense of security? A knock at the door broke my spiraling thoughts. My heart jumped, half expecting it to be Emma or David coming back to twist the knife a little deeper. But when I opened the door, it was neither of them. It was my mother. "Jack," she said, her voice soft but firm. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her sharp eyes taking in the disarray of the house and, no doubt, the disarray of my face. "I heard from David. He told me everything." I closed the door and leaned against it, the energy draining out of me. "Then you know," I said flatly. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I can't imagine how you must be feeling right now." I let out a bitter laugh. "Feeling? I'm not sure I even know how to feel anymore." She reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "Jack, listen to me. You're their father. Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. Those kids love you. They need you." Her words struck a nerve, and I turned away, pacing the room. "And what happens when they find out?" I asked, my voice rising. "When they learn that everything they thought they knew was a lie? How do I look them in the eye and explain this?" "You tell them the truth," she said simply. "In time, they'll understand. But right now, what they need is for you to be there for them. To show them that some things don't change, no matter what." Her words made sense, but they didn't make the pain any easier to bear. "And what about Emma?" I asked. "What about David? How am I supposed to deal with them?" She sighed, her expression heavy with sadness. "That's something only you can decide. But don't let your anger destroy you, Jack. Don't let it take away what's left." "What's left?" Those words lingered in my mind long after she left. What was left? My marriage was over. My trust in David was shattered. My sense of identity had been stripped away. All that remained were the kids. Lily and Noah. And they were everything. By the time they woke up, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to let them suffer for the mistakes of the adults in their lives. Whatever it took, I would be there for them. I would be their father, in every way that mattered. The day passed in a blur of normalcy: breakfast, cartoons, a trip to the park. I forced myself to smile, to laugh, to be present for them. But underneath it all, the storm still raged. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat down at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper. I needed to make sense of everything, to figure out a plan. But as I stared at the paper, the words wouldn't come. All I could see were their faces. Lily's bright smile. Noah's curious eyes. They deserved better than this. Better than me. My phone buzzed, and I hesitated before picking it up. It was a text from Emma. Asterisk will need to talk about custody soon. I'll call you in a few days, asterisk. Custody. The word felt like a death sentence. I put the phone down without replying, my mind spinning. How could I fight for them when I wasn't sure I even deserved them? How could I be their father when the very foundation of our relationship was built on a lie? As the days turned into weeks, the answers didn't come. Life moved on, as it always does, but the questions remained. Every time I looked at the kids, I felt both love and doubt, pride and fear. I was their father. But was that enough? One evening, as I tucked them into bed, Noah looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes. "Daddy," he said, "are we always going to be together?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. I hope so, buddy," I said. His small hand reached out, gripping mine. "Good," he said simply. As I sat in the quiet of the house that night, I realized there were no easy answers. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with pain and doubt. But for now, I would hold on to what mattered. I would be their father, as best as I could, for as long as they needed me. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.